Welcome to this explainer. Today, we aren't just talking about a simple game of tennis, we are actually going to analyze the human body as a high-performance engine battling some truly brutal environmental conditions. I want you to imagine a highly tuned machine forced to operate inside an absolute furnace, all while being completely bombarded by chaotic sensory data. Well, that is the literal reality of elite tennis. We're going to break down exactly how these extreme environments impact both the biomechanics and the mind of the athlete.
Take a grueling tournament like the Australian Open. The wet bulb globe temperature there frequently hits 32 degrees Celsius. And listen, that is not just a pleasantly warm afternoon out on the court. It is an extreme ecological stress test that pushes human physiology right to its absolute breaking point.
In fact, recent physiological profiling research puts it pretty bluntly. They found that thermal, physiological, and perceptual strain directly alter match play. So in other words, the environment isn't just uncomfortable for the player, it actively degrades the athlete's internal machinery from the inside out, causing this crazy cascading failure of both physical and mental systems.
So, how are we going to unpack this giant puzzle? Well, we'll start with the sheer physical demands of tennis, then see what happens when extreme heat and humidity hit. Explore how wind and sun totally mess with the player's perception, reveal the hidden mental toll of fatigue, and finally, look at how the sport is desperately trying to adapt to a changing climate.
All right, part one, the physical demands of tennis. Because before the weather even factors in, elite tennis is already a game of sheer kinetic violence.
Just think about the energy flow of a massive serve for a second. It is a highly tuned kinetic chain. The legs initiate these massive ground reaction forces. Then, explosive trunk rotation transfers that energy upward. And finally, the shoulder snaps it all into the serve. This entire sequence happens in literal fractions of a second, and it requires peak mechanical efficiency. Any tiny disruption here, and it instantly costs the player power and accuracy. And even in totally perfect weather, different stances place completely devastating mechanical loads on the body. Take an open stance forehand. It demands immense rotational torque, which skyrockets the risk of hip injuries. On the flip side, a closed stance forehand relies on a linear weight transfer, and that places a much higher biomechanical load straight onto the knees. So players are basically constantly trading off which joints to punish just to generate power. Moving right along to part two, battling extreme heat and humidity. What actually happens when we drop this finely tuned, already mechanically stressed engine into an absolute furnace? Well, raw heat isn't actually the true antagonist here. It's really all about the wet bulb globe temperature, or WBGT. This is a composite index that combines temperature, humidity, wind speed, and solar radiation. The real danger, the true threat, is the body's total inability to cool itself when all of these factors attack at the exact same time. To put that into perspective, compare a hot and dry day to a hot and humid one. In dry heat, players still sweat, the evaporation works, and their aerobic endurance actually holds up surprisingly well. But you add high humidity to the mix, evaporation just stops. The sweat literally just sits there on the skin. This suffocates the body's ability to cool down, causing a really sharp, really dangerous decline in endurance. Now, it's absolutely crucial to point out that these extreme conditions are uniquely dangerous for wheelchair athletes. Their thermal regulation is specifically challenged because of altered autonomic sweat responses, especially for athletes with spinal cord injuries. And they generally have less active muscle mass available to dissipate that heat. It adds this incredibly critical layer of environmental stress that demands highly specialized preparation.
Okay, part three, wind, sun, and perception. Let's look beyond just the temperature for a minute to see how the elements wage a literal war on an athlete's sensory processing. So, how does wind actually affect a player? I mean, we usually just assume it blows the ball off course, right? But the science shows it fundamentally alters the player's entire perceptual reality. When the wind is howling, it triggers something called cutaneous wind perception. Basically, the athlete's skin is bombarded with so much sensory data that it creates a physical overload. This completely scrambles the brain's read of the environment. Instead of focusing 100% on the game, the brain gets totally distracted just trying to process what the skin is feeling.
Under perfect indoor conditions, the brain knows exactly what to expect, and that allows for incredibly sharp visual tracking. But introduce sun and wind glare, the brain is forced into this state of constant sensory adaptation, and this chaos literally delays visual perception. The athlete wastes precious game-deciding milliseconds just adapting to glaring light instead of tracking the ball.
Which brings us to part 4, the mental toll of fatigue. This is the cognitive breakdown that happens when physical strain and environmental chaos compound on top of each other.
As fatigue sets in, we see a severe, measurable drop in ground stroke targeting performance. And the fascinating part? It's not just tired arm muscles causing the miss. Research attributes this directly to mental fatigue. The brain simply lacks the energy to compute and send precise targeting coordinates to the body.
Think about gaze behavior. When a player is fresh, their eyes sharply and predictably track an opponent's serve. But acute physical fatigue completely alters that. Their visual tracking becomes delayed and purely reactive. They stop predicting where the ball will be and are forced to just react to it, which heavily slows down their response times.
And it gets deeper. Prolonged exposure to environmental stress literally changes how a player's brain evaluates risk, leading to decision fatigue. Studies looking at matches at Wimbledon showed that athletes experience measurable loss aversion. Instead of playing aggressively to win, the exhausted brain unconsciously forces them to play conservatively just to avoid losing. It's wild.
Finally, part 5, adapting to a changing climate. The climate is shifting, no doubt about it. So how is the sport fighting back against this relentless antagonist?
Well, to keep athletes safe and maintain peak performance, we are seeing some major mitigation strategies being deployed. The ATP has implemented strict extreme heat rules. We now see mandatory pre-match heat acclimation protocols, incredibly structured hydration, and even advanced resilience training designed specifically so players' brains can handle that sensory chaos we talked about. You can actually trace the evolution of sports medicine to see just how seriously this is being taken now. We've moved from historical norms of just basic warm-ups and drinking water into early heat awareness and then into active pre-cooling with things like ice vests. Today, in the era of modern integration, tournaments rely on hard data, like those Australian Open WBGT thresholds, to legally suspend play and protect the players. So, as global temperatures continue to rise, it leaves us with a pretty massive question. Are we pushing human biomechanics past its absolute limit? Or will sports science always find a way to adapt the human engine? It's a question that is absolutely going to define the future of the sport. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll see you on the next one.